Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. The Outdoor Adventure Series celebrates individuals and families, businesses, and organizations that seek out and promote the exploration, stewardship, conservation, and access and enjoyment of the great outdoors. Our guest today is Matthew Dickerson. Now, Matthew is a trout and fly fishing enthusiast. He is a manager, editor, and feature writer for Trout Downstream. He is a member of the Outdoor Writers Association of America and has served on the OWAA board since 2021. He is the author of numerous books about trout, fly fishing, rivers, and ecology. And in his spare time, I hear he is a professor at Middlebury College in Vermont. Matthew, it's a pleasure to have you back on the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast.
Thank you. I enjoyed our chance to converse last time you had me. So it was always fun to have conversations with somebody who appreciates the outdoors and conservation and cares about some of the same things I care about.
Fantastic. For our listeners, in the spirit of full disclosure, I had a chance to catch up with Matthew at the Outdoor Writers Conference, the OWAA conference in Casper, Wyoming last month, and had a chance to break bread together. And I learned that he was going to be off on a trip to Alaska soon. And I thought, wow, I would love to hear about that. But before we go down that path, Matthew, tell us a little bit about what's been happening since you and I first got together. God, it was back in early 2021 when you were on the show and you were discussing the launch of your newest book at the time, Fine Spotted Trout on Coral Creek. And so love to hear what's been going on with you.
Well, I think one thing, I guess, is that book that I had been working on for probably since 2016 is actually in print now. So that's done. That's available. And I've moved on to the next project, I guess. I mean, there's always that a couple day moment when you finally have, when you've been working on a book for a long time and you have it in your hand and you're all excited about it. And then about 3 days later, you have to think, okay, now it's time to do the next project.
It's like, now what's next?
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. I think one of the things I'm excited about with the book, though, is that I was artist in residence at Glacier National Park in 2017, and I have donated all of my royalties to Glacier National Park Conservancy.
Wow.
From that book. So the Conservancy and therefore the park itself will benefit from sales of the book. And my publisher has actually very generously matched my own contributions of my royalties. So the Conservancy will sort of be getting double royalties from that book. I mentioned that because I know conservation is one of the, conservation of the outdoors is one of the goals or topics of your show, and that you care about conservation and access. And these are things that help, that help the world really.
Yeah,
what the park does.
Most definitely. It is a growing interest, at the conference in Casper. That seemed to be the consistent theme throughout the entire conference, was conversation around conservation, the ecosystem, ecology, and the environment. I'm curious, for a national park like Glacier, what does it mean to be an artist in residence?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, there's certainly some variation. There's a lot of national parks and some state parks and private organizations that have artist residencies. And the residencies can vary a little bit, or they can vary actually quite a bit from park to park, or from one park to a national forest. And they can vary a little bit from depending on the type of art you do. My primary art actually as a narrative nonfiction writer, a creative writer, although I also have done a lot of photography, and I don't consider myself primarily a photographer. I'm a writer who does photography also. Sure. But my photographs have also appeared in magazines as well. So at the very basic levels, I mean, I'm in that place doing my art, which means for me, I was in that place doing writing. And I think the part of the goal is that you are doing work that's inspired by the place, and that ultimately should benefit not just my readers, but it should also benefit the park in the sense of giving people more information about the important work that's being done about the park, or about how to visit it, or what to benefit from it, or why our national parks are important. I think that was probably also maybe two big topics for me that I hope benefited the park, is helping people know both what is the important work that's being done. There's a lot of scientific work being done within Glacier National Park about native fish, and also why our national park system is important.
When you are in this residence, are you physically in the park for a specific period of time? Do you,
Yes.
so you literally travel there and you stay there?
Yeah, I was in the park. A lot of these residencies last for anywhere from 2 to 4 or 6 weeks. The
Okay.
Glacier residency was a full month. So I spent the full month of June of 2017 in the park, staying in the park. That largely means off grid. So I had no cell service and no internet, which really helps you focus on writing. A lot of the daily distractions of being connected to the world are gone. So yeah, it's exactly what it means. I'm spending the whole month in the park, writing about the park, learning about the park, exploring it. I had time spent with National Park Service and USGS scientists, learning about the work they did. I spent some time with some of the park rangers, and also just spent time in listening and hiking and sitting still and learning.
The photo that is behind you, and for our listeners on our webpage and the YouTube channel, you're going to see the interview with Matthew. You'll see his background. And I have to say that background to me is inspiring. I mean, I love my background. This was from Casper, the Oregon Trail, but I can't think of a better place to have a cup of coffee in the morning or a beverage in the afternoon, evening, than where you're at, where that photo was taken. So if that's what you got to see, is images like that, I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. That is, those who've been to Glacier National Park may recognize the image, but that is the North Fork of the Flathead River, which borders the western side of the park. And it's the border between the national park and the Flathead National Forest. And yeah, it was an amazing place to spend a month. Often I would just pull out a chair and sit at a place like that, or some other lake or river or pond or beaver dam, and listen, take pictures, and then write. A lot of time writing.
Wow. If you ever want a podcaster to join you on these adventures, actually, I'm thinking that could be an idea. I need to pursue that. That could be that's going to be a side conversation between you and I. What were the products, the articles, besides the book, that also came out of this artist in residence?
Well, actually, I had two books that came out of the Glacier National Park residency. One book is titled The Voices of Rivers.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really much less of a fly fishing focus and just more of a nature, environment, ecology, history focus. It was about the park, but not necessarily geared for people who really want to know about trout or fishing, just who would like to know about the rivers and the ecology and the science there. And then I had the most recent one that just came out 7 or 8 months ago, called Fine Spotted Trout in Corral Creek. And that was one really more geared very specifically towards native fish in the Northern Rockies.
Okay. I just realized I was saying Coral Creek. It's Corral Creek. So my correction.
It was, that creek actually is not in Glacier National Park. Corral Creek is in the Bridger-Teton National Forest in western Wyoming, which is the other setting for that book, along with Glacier National Park. And it was actually a corral that creek has a corral on it, but that was where the Oregon Trail passed through those mountains. So it was probably far more crowded 100 years ago than it is now. But in addition to those two books, I had a 4-part newspaper series that won New England Newspaper and Press Association Award for the best sports column of the year.
Sports column. Wow.
As an outdoor writer.
Okay.
And I had some magazine pieces I did as well, mostly for fishing magazines.
Okay.
About that
when
as
you're
well.
writing for the media, and I know you've shared a couple of your links, one for the Sun Journal about the lithium deposits, and then for the KDLG.org public safety, there was the fires.
Those weren't pieces I wrote. Yeah, those weren't pieces I wrote, but those are pieces that have inspired my interest or my research.
Oh, okay.
In pieces.
Okay.
So I thought when you asked for those links, you were asking what are the things that interest me right now.
Okay.
And those are stories that I'm interested in writing about.
Okay.
So those were upcoming projects.
Ah,
that I'm interested in writing about. So I can
how
tell you,
are
I can mention those too if you want. If you
I'm
want to,
curious,
yeah,
as a scholar, I mean, professor, you're a prolific writer, ideas, I would imagine, just they come to you and
sure.
you have to be aware that there's an idea here and I need to stop, take a
Hmm.
note and say, okay, I need to go deeper here.
Yeah.
And I'm curious for those two items, how did that moment affect you and what goes through your mind when there's something here and I need to write more about it or learn more about it?
I think there's all sorts of interesting and important stories that pop up all the time. I mean, anything from what's going on in Ukraine right now with Putin's war on Ukraine to local environmental issues to local politics, right? And there's no shortage of things that are important that you hope somebody will write about, that you hope good writers will explore and get information about it and tell the stories of what's happening to the world. But for me, the question is, well, is that something that's not just, is it something that's both interesting to me, important to the world? Is it something I think I could write about well? Is it something that we need more people to write about? And if so, do I have an angle that would enable me to do it well, to tell a good story about it? So those are sort of the questions I have. Do I have a background that would enable me to go in and already have some knowledge, but am I also in a place where I can learn more? Because for me, writing isn't just about telling people things I already know. Writing is a way that I learn, a way that I explore. So when I went to Glacier National Park, a lot of that month was learning. And the things I'm writing about weren't things I already knew when I went there. What I'm writing about is a lot of that is what I learned while I was there in my research.
Yeah, and this brings up a couple questions that you and I kind of chatted or prepared. And one of them is, how has your writing perhaps helped to change and what you're learning helped to change how you see things and how your thinking has evolved on that particular topic?
Yeah, I mean, I have a background educationally, if you go back 40 years to when I started college, that is on the engineering side of things. I actually went to college and studied computer science. And so there is a certain mindset there that what matters is efficiency, and that there's also maybe a mindset that you look at what's around you and try to engineer it to meet my desires or my goals. And there's nothing wrong with efficiency. There's a lot of things for which we would like to be more efficient, that efficiency is good. And there's certainly times when having a good engineering mindset is really important and useful. But I think that sometimes it was easy for me to let those values be what really drove me. Like I would maybe be driving by some little river or little stream, and my mindset would be, how can I engineer that stream or river to meet my desires as a teenager, even as a 25-year-old or 30-year-old? I would imagine, oh, here's a little stream. How could I put a dam in it? Or what species of fish would I like to plant there or stock there to meet my own desires? And I think when I really began doing some of this writing, one of the ways it really changed my mindset was to kind of say, okay, that's often really not the best way to think about the natural world. I think Wendell Berry is one of the writers that really impacted me. And Wendell Berry has a beautiful essay called The Native Hill. And in this essay, he talks about the difference between someone who builds roads and someone who makes a path. And one approach is you look at the land and you ask, how can I engineer it to meet my desires? How can I engineer it to make my world more efficient? And that's the road builder. And whereas the person who's just creating a path, they're saying, what is the natural landscape? What is the contours of landscape? How can I conform my practices to the world? And maybe that's the kind of the ultimate way of saying it. Do I want to conform the world to my desires? Or am I willing to conform my practices to the world? If it's agriculture, instead of trying to twist the land into growing what I want to grow, even if it shouldn't really grow there, or there's not enough water to grow it there, or there's not the right kind of soil there, but I try to force it to grow what I want? Or do I conform my farming practices to the natural landscape? How steep is the slope? How much rain does it get? How much sun does it get? And it sort of that certainly impacted my view of just looking at a river, not how can I change that river and put in dams and put in fish that I want, but how can we make our practices conform to the natural world to preserve its health and its systems? So I'm far more interested now in helping to protect or restore native fish than I am just making a good sport fishery for my own
Sure.
pleasure.
Sure. As you were sharing that, I was thinking about the Oregon Trail behind me and how it, for the most part, followed the path of the Platte River. And
Yeah,
whereas the engineer would say, what's the straightest line and how do I get
yeah,
there?
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And that often is very destructive to the
Yeah.
landscape.
Yeah.
I mean, the history of what invasive species have done around the world is pretty, in many cases, pretty awful and destructive. What planting lake trout have done in both Yellowstone National Park and Glacier National Park has been very destructive, not just to other fish, but to the whole ecosystems. I think the number of osprey in Yellowstone Lake has collapsed in the past couple decades from something like 65 nesting pairs to fewer than five, one, two, or three nesting pairs, because the invasive lake trout getting into Yellowstone Lake decimated the cutthroat trout population, and the osprey and many other species were dependent on cutthroat trout for their food.
I did a podcast with Chris Paparo. I don't know if you remember him from the Vermont conference. He's Fish
Mhm.
Guy Photos up in New England.
Yeah.
And I remember him sharing some photos in his Instagram and YouTube, the tiger, it's the tigerfish. I think that's what it is. It's
Mhm.
an invasive species.
Yeah.
And then this past couple of weeks ago, I interviewed Michelle Johnston, who is a research ecologist for the National Marine Sanctuaries down in Flower Garden Reefs, Banks National Marine Sanctuary. Got to get that right. Her episode will be coming up on Wednesday, but there too, they have this invasive fish. And I'm
Mhm.
thinking this fish has gotten around and it's wherever it's going, it's decimating populations. Now, maybe that was just intentional, just releasing boats coming by and they release stuff from their tanks. Who knows? But some of it is unintentional or intentional. Some of it is we think we're doing a good thing, like with the trout in these
Yeah.
streams, and you just never know what's going to happen. And we have to find ways to recover from that.
It's a lot easier to really screw things up badly than it is to fix them once you've screwed them up.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
In places there have been success stories about being able to bring native species back, but in other places it's just going to be impossible for many reasons. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think two words that come out of it that kind of get back to the earlier conversation is humility. I want to approach the world with more humility, less arrogance, and attentiveness. I think that's something that's often lacking in the world today. Just we're in so much of a rush and so eager to get quick answers and quick information that the art of attentiveness, of just sitting and paying attention, is so important. And that was actually one of the benefits of being an artist in residence, was
I was just
giving that time to be attentive.
I was as you were saying that, I was just thinking that's definitely the benefit of being up there. When you describe your writing, or perhaps let's maybe flip it, how would your writing be described by somebody perhaps who's first coming across your work in the environmental, the fishing,
Yeah.
the ecology? How would they describe your writing?
Well, my background as a writer is not in journalism. So I don't necessarily approach a story the same way a journalist would. I was a novelist and a fiction writer before I came into outdoor writing. So I think I'm really interested in story and in characters. But I've also been inspired by some great nature and environmental writers, people as like Wendell Berry, whom I've already mentioned. Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass, is just a beautiful work by someone who's both a really gifted scientist who's done really good work in the sciences, but also a beautiful creative writer, a Vermont writer who actually lives in the same town as me, named John Elder. And so these are some of the people who've inspired me. So what I'm often trying to do is weave together several things. I want a personal narrative, but I think too much of memoir is just to be, I don't know, very blunt, is almost like emotional vomit. It's just a person just spilling their guts about things that nobody really cares about. So there's always a fine line when there's a personal narrative of not wanting that to just be all about me, I am present. I was one of the characters when I was there at Glacier National Park. So part of what I'm writing about is my own experience, but it should be informed writing. So I want my writing to be informed by science. I want my writing to be informed by history. I want my writing to be informed by just careful attentiveness, kind of the old nature writing tradition where you're just writing about what you see, what's there in front of you, what do you experience, what does the grass look like, how do the birds sound, how are the trees growing? And that's honestly, that's not that far away from science. The best scientists build their science around observation, careful observation. So I think my style is an interweaving of personal narrative, of the nature writing tradition, writing that's informed by science and history, and maybe a little bit of what you might think of as journalism as well, of just doing the research, finding out what the story is, finding out what other people have said and what other people have done, and what are the hidden stories as well. I try to
Okay.
weave all those elements.
Okay. Now you have another artist in residence that's coming up at a very special place. I wonder if you
Yeah.
could share a little bit about that and the process you have been going through to prepare for it.
Yeah, this summer I was selected as artist in residence for state parks in Alaska. That's a residency I did not know existed until just a few months ago. And I applied and was selected. So I have been doing a lot of writing about Alaska from magazines, for newspapers, and actually working. Some of that writing has already come out in one book, The Voices of Rivers. But I'm working on another book that I hope to wrap up this summer, focusing in Bristol Bay. What initially brought me up there was the proposed Pebble Mine and trying to learn about that and try to learn what the impacts of that would be if it were ever done. So I've been especially interested in Bristol Bay, where the Pebble Mine would be. I'm very interested in native fish. So I've been learning about the importance of native fish in the local ecosystem. And when I first started working on this book in 2015 and went to visit and learn about the proposed Pebble Mine and about another mine that already existed, the Red Dog Mine, I went up thinking that the mine was the main story I was going to write about. And it is a really important story. But then the longer I was there, the more I learned that climate change is in many ways an even bigger story in some places than the resource extraction or the dams. And so all of those things kind of come together, the mining and resource extraction, the importance of native fish to river ecology, the impacts of climate change. And I think these were some of the things I was interested in, as well as just good creative writing in the artist residency in Alaska. So I applied, and I will be spending time in July and then again in September in at least three different state parks in Alaska that I had not been to. I've been into a lot of state parks in Alaska, but I'll spend time at three that I haven't been to before. Wood-Tip-Chick State Park, which is in Bristol Bay. It's off the road system. And it is the largest state park in the United States. Another state historic park, the Ernest Gruning State Historic Park, where I think the articles of Confederation for the state of Alaska were written by the person who was the governor before it was a state, and then I think became its first senator when it was named a state, and then Point Bridget State Park.
Okay.
And I'll spend time in each of those, about a little over 2 weeks total.
Is two questions. Well, the first is your stays there, July and September. Are they pretty much off grid as well? Okay.
The stay in July, I will be in a remote wilderness cabin. And my only contact with the world will be, I've just acquired my first light texting device, my little Garmin unit, that in an emergency, I could send some text out and say, quick, send an airplane to pick me up. And in fact, there's a pretty good wildfire going on just a few miles from where I will be.
Okay.
Right now. So that trip is certainly in question. And even if there wasn't a wildfire, again, there's been so much drought and unprecedented heats in the north that wildfires are becoming far more common there. But yes, I'll be off the grid with the satellite texting device. And then the two state parks in the Juneau area where I will be, I won't have internet there. And in one of them, I won't have phone service. Will be a 2.5 mile hike in but at least it's sort of connected by road to Juneau.
Okay.
From one of the cabins, I can hike 2.5 miles and then drive 40 miles, and I will be in a city. Go. If I need to in the middle of the week, I can go out and get a burger and something to drink with my burger.
I love that. Eh, So off the grid, are you pretty much composing on notepads, or if do you have a computer with like a wire with a sat? What am I thinking of? The solar with like a solar
Yeah,
battery pack?
solar battery pack. I do have a solar battery pack for precisely this reason. I would
Okay.
not. It only produces USB out. So I would not want to try to use it to power my laptop. So what I will do is bring an iPad, which takes a lot less power, and I can recharge that, and I can run that between batteries and solar. I can run that for a week. Now, when I've been someplace like a wilderness lodge, my favorite place to go and write for the past 7 years has been the Farm Lodge
Hmm.
in Port Ellsworth, Alaska, which is just 10-minute walk across the little dirt airstrip from the headquarters of Lake Clark National Park. It's an amazing lodge, wonderful food. It attracts photographers and people who want to go up to Twin Lakes and see some of the historic cabins out there. It's also a great location for fishing expeditions in both throughout the Bristol Bay area and Katmai National Park and Lake Clark National Park. But they have electricity and hot showers, and I wouldn't count on good internet there, but when I'm there, I will have my laptop and I'll be plugging it in and charging it and writing, and every once in a while sending an email home. So that's my favorite place to go to write, because it's such a beautiful place and so much wonderful hospitality there at the lodge, and the pilots do a great job getting me out to really cool places to explore.
Okay. A not so obvious question for me is, are you alone, or are there other artists in residence along with you and or in other locales within the state park system?
I think I don't remember the exact number. I think the Alaska State Park system picks 2 artists in residence every month from all the applicants.
Hmm. Okay.
So I won't be there with them in the same cabin at the same time.
Right.
When I was artist in residence at Acadia National Park in 2018, there was one other artist in residence at the same time. And then when I left, another artist in residence came in. Glacier National Park, I think, will be picking 3 artists in residence for the summer. Each one has a different month. So I think it might be June, July, and September, possibly. The year I was there, they had 4 artist residents, but I don't have to share it.
Okay.
I won't be in the same cabin with somebody else, except my second part of my residency in September. My daughter-in-law, who's a painter, was selected as artist in residence with me.
Oh, wow.
So that's kind of really exciting for me to go work with a family member.
Yeah.
She will be painting and I will be writing and doing photography. You should really check out her website and look at how beautiful her art is. She's a young painter. They were talking about an emerging artist, but she's already has that beautiful work. Her feature piece in her last exhibit was a 3-foot by 4-foot painting of close up of the side of a Dolly Varden char. Which is, if you've ever seen a Dolly Varden char, it's just absolutely beautiful. Maybe the only fish in the world that I think is as beautiful or even more beautiful than a brook trout.
Okay. Well, I would love if well, first, what is your daughter-in-law's name?
McKenna Dickerson.
McKenna
Yeah,
Dickerson.
McKenna Dickerson. Yep.
And if I imagine she has a web page that you
She
can
does.
share the link, and we'll have it in our show notes. And if you're so inclined, Matthew, when you get back, say, hey, how would you like to be on a podcast, McKenna? And I want you to introduce you to Howard. So I'd be happy to have her on the podcast as well.
She's way more interesting than I am. And I have a feeling that the art that she produces from this trip will be far more appealing to most people than
I look forward to both of your output and the art in your own ways that you're each producing. Before we head out today, well, first of all, what's dawning on me is you're sharing and gifting us with this opportunity that you're taking, that you have been accepted into, this artist in residence.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if you would also perhaps like to come back when you return to kind of give us a kind of a debrief of what it was like. And I think that'd be kind of cool. What do you think?
Oh, certainly. If you can handle me rambling on, chatting away again, happy to.
We'll have you and McKenna at
Yeah.
the same time. The fact
Yeah.
that could be even better.
Yeah, I'm sure I will learn a lot. I'll learn a lot, even more about the native fish and the rivers in Bristol Bay and kind of how things are changing there. And of course, what we haven't even really ever done is just talk about fishing, because that would get the conversation going also in a whole different direction, is talking about the experiences there.
I
Um,
would love that. And I don't know if I shared with you during our initial conversation, first podcast, and I've shared it since then because there's like a sad irony to me being a member of the Outdoor Writers Association of America is, and I've shared this with other fishers and anglers, is I've never been fishing. And it's like, I need to take care of this. I need to,
yeah. But when we finish the official part of this interview, we'll just stay on for a couple of minutes, and we'll see about sometime when we can have one of these podcasts live by the river.
I can't think of a better scenario than to do just that, because I have actually been going out and doing some
Huh?
on location podcasts. And so what the heck? We can do that. So we'll talk about that. Before we head out, just, I'd love if you would share, we call it an aha moment. We did this way back in your initial interview, but really what continues to give you the energy and like, oh my God, I'm doing this. I get to do this for a living. And whether it's the education, whether it's just a career as the writer for nature, conservation, ecology, but what's your aha moment as you look back in your career?
I don't know if I have lots of moments as I understand the question. My books don't sell a ton of copies, so it's not like I'm famous as a writer, but I do hear from people from time to time, people who read one of my books or even who read my newspaper articles and will just send me a note and tell me that that my piece, what I wrote, helped them think or helped them understand something or prompted them to care more deeply about conservation issues. So anytime I feel like my writing has either been enjoyable for somebody, they've enjoyed the writing, they've enjoyed the story, they've brought them delight to read, to have some experience for me to share an experience with them, or it's helped them to understand something more deeply. That's partly helps motivate me to continue writing, to feel like my writing makes a difference
Okay.
in the world. Um,
I appreciate that. Thank you. And any final thoughts or insights that you would like to share with our listeners about your career trajectory or just lessons you've learned along the way of doing what you do? Any insights you'd like to share with them?
I spend a lot of time I spend a lot of time on out in the water. When I'm not doing it, I'm wishing I was. And I've found, like a lot of other places in the country in the last 15 years, it's become in some ways a less friendly place. 25 years ago, it seems like I would never really bump into someone on a trout stream who would be ornery or mean. It was always kind of you bump into someone else and you meet them and you start talking and you appreciate the same things that you're both doing. You appreciate how good the fishing is, or you console each other on how bad it is, or it's just a friendly meeting. I have a good friend right now that I met on a trout river in Wisconsin. We ended up going out for burgers and beer that night, and we have stayed friends for a decade now. But I'm finding a lot more encounters on streams that people are almost hostile, uh, and I don't know if there's something changing about fishing or if it's just the way the world is changing, but it's discouraging and it's sad. And now I just make a point, like if I meet someone on the river, it doesn't matter. I don't want to wait and find out whether they're going to be nice. I want to have the initiative to just go up and be kind to people and nice to people. I had a chance last Wednesday on a river in Maine, a fairly well-known river, and I had done some pretty aggressive wading to get out to a pretty difficult part in the river, a big gravel bar, and had to cross a deep channel to get out there. And I'm fishing there. And some couple of guys, they were older than I am, came up in a drift boat and they pulled in and they anchored at the bar, and they weren't mean at all. They were actually I think they wanted to make sure they weren't stepping into my spot. And I've seen other people who would respond to that situation just really nasty, like cursing at them or threatening them. And I went over and just started chatting with them, asking them how they're doing. And they asked me what they just seen me catch a fish. They asked me what I caught it on, and I gave them one of my flies that I had tied as being effective. And so I think sometimes just when you can choose to do that, it can just change the whole environment. It can make their day better. It can make your own day better. And it's so much more enjoyable than being ornery
Sure.
and
You
grumping.
know, in the coaching world, when I'm coaching individuals who work inside organizations, we always talk about choice.
Yeah.
You have a choice of how you want to show up,
Yeah,
because you can
absolutely.
feed yours or somebody else's anger and being ornery, or you can choose, say, no, I'm going to choose to be open and have an open mindset about whatever I'm doing in the moment. So I love that. And I love the description of, here's a fly.
Yeah.
Hopefully you'll good luck
Yeah.
with this. I love that.
It's, I think, an analogy, a metaphor is just your mindset. Like people will come in and they'll be driving, they'll start grumbling about the traffic. Oh, I hate the traffic. It's so terrible. And my response is, you're part of the traffic.
Yeah.
If you're in the middle of traffic, you are one of the cars that's making the traffic.
Right.
So the same thing is true in a trout stream. If you're complaining that the trout stream is too crowded, you're part of the crowd.
Right. Right.
So instead of complaining, just make it a better environment by the way you treat people.
Most definitely. Matthew, before we head out, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where are the best places for them to go?
I have a website that's devoted really to just fishing and trout and stream ecology called troutdownstream.net. Just no hyphenation, just troutdownstream.net. I also have a website that's more for my more general writing that covers my fiction and my philosophy writing and my literary writing. And it's just my name, MatthewDickerson.net. So those are my two websites. And of course, and any of my books, my last two books that came out of my artist residencies were A Fine Spotted Trout on Corral Creek and The Voices of Rivers.
Very good. And I know you're also on Instagram because I follow you there
Yep.
as well. So we'll most definitely provide the backlinks to troutdownstream.net, as well as the author site, the MatthewDickerson.net, and also to links back to all your books, or the ones you've just mentioned, as well as to the Instagram page. So we're going to have a link back to your daughter-in-law, McKenna, her website, and so we can get people excited about learning more about her. Matthew, it's been a pleasure to have you back on the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast, and really appreciate you taking the time, and we wish you the best in Alaska on your residency, artist in residence, and looking forward to having you back on to chat about that outcome and what it was like.
Great. I'm looking forward to another conversation.
Sounds like a
with you.
plan. Listen, stay on the line. We're going to do a quick
I will.
close, and you and I can have that final chat, and we could talk about, Howard, here's how we're going to get you fishing. All right. I love that. All right, folks, we have just been chatting with Matthew Dickerson. He's a trout and fly fishing enthusiast, conservationist, really accomplished author, both in fiction and nonfiction, but very well known for many of his books. His two most recent ones, A Fine Spotted Trout on Corral Creek and Voices of Rivers. And we certainly hope that we hear more about his trip as artist in residence going to the state parks in Alaska. And we wish him the best there as well. And I'm looking forward to having a little bit of a debrief. And hey, we're even going to hopefully meet his daughter-in-law, McKenna Dickerson. She is an artist. We'll get to perhaps see some of her work as well. And perhaps they will even come on to the next podcast together. Who knows? But I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Again, we're going to provide all the backlinks to Matthew's site. Let us know what you thought of today's episode. You can find us on OutdoorAdventureSeries.com. You can find us on our Facebook and LinkedIn pages, Outdoor Adventure Series, as well as YouTube. We now have our Outdoor Adventure Series YouTube page. So when you go out there, make sure you hit that big red subscribe button so you can continue to get notified whenever we post a new episode up on YouTube. And of course, we are on all of the podcast directories. So like it, comment on it, share it, And we just hope you are enjoying our growing library within the outdoor space. Enthusiasts, everything from hunting, hiking, trout, fly fishing, scuba diving, we've got it all. And we are really starting to also embrace the topics around conservation, environmental initiatives to really kind of continue to make our outdoor space available today, tomorrow, and for our generations and beyond. So, folks, that's about it for today. And remember, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. And we will see you on a future episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. Take care now.